I'm Dr. Joseph Wittering. It's my pleasure to be joined again by one of the greatest benzo coaches out there, Chris Page. Today we're finishing up our series on H.O.P.E, which is a strategy that Chris uses with his patients to kind of guide them out of the pit of despair that is protracted benzodiazepine withdrawal injury. So without further ado, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us about P&E.
Well, great. Good to see you again. And thank you again for having me back on the interview podcast. And really just excited again to talk about hope and how essential it is for everybody suffering out there. So we covered H and O. And so I created, in the mnemonic for P and E. The first one is probably the hardest one. Well, maybe they're all hard in their own individual ways, but I think about, for P, I came up with two words. I came up with patience and persistence. And patience is so crucial in this because anybody that is iatrogenically injured, especially chronically, knows that the time length of this can really stretch on and on for some people. And, I've often said to my clients, you almost have to conceptualize things in dog years. If something takes 1 month of a normal course, it might take 7 months in this, things like that. I mean, just to kind of have a realistic time frame in our heads, even though I think everybody would also agree you have to kind of throw the calendar out. But, I think patience, which is, the ability to delay things, the ability to tolerate delaying things and accepting that things are delayed, and that suffering or trouble that you're tolerating it without trying to get frustrated and upset. And I know sometimes I ask very challenging things, which is how do I not be upset and scared and overwhelmed when I'm going through, akathisia or other iatrogenic syndromes? And I would argue again, it's to the best of your ability, just trying to the absolute best of your ability to be patient. Because we all want to know, I think another thing that's hard in this is the lack of an expiration date. And that's again where the patience comes in. And I always conceptualized my journey as a day-to-day slog, a day-to-day marathon, but every step, even when I was pacing, I would conceptualize it as I was walking towards the outcome, walking towards the healing that I truly hoped would be available for me one day and is now. And, patience again. Gandhi said to lose patience is to lose the battle. And I think both of us are so heavily invested in helping people fighting these battles because it is a fight. It's an incredibly challenging fight. But we have to stay in the fight, have the patience and the resolve to stay in the fight because as we'll talk about with E, is the payoff, the outcome is what's worth the patience. And, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a philosopher, said, patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. And that is so true. I would argue for anybody out there scared and suffering, I know patience is a bitter pill to swallow in this. It's a very challenging thing to ask you to wait when you are suffering. But the payoff is what's worth it. The fruit that is at the end tastes so good. And it's just the most amazing outcome that justifies this awful, awful journey that you're enduring right now. And
And
Confucius
Chris,
says, oh yeah, go ahead,
well, I
jump
was
in.
just going to say, when you're telling people to stay patient, um, how do you get them to do this? How do you get them to you know in, to let go of wanting it to be solved, right now or in a month or something, or and tell them that, hey, this might last 5 years. This could be 3 to 5 years or something like.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's a radical acceptance again. I think it's just this idea that I'm not asking you to be happy about this. I'm not asking you to be okay with it even. I'm just asking you to be with it, to stay in the game, to stay in the fight. And I often tell people, let me pull you to the finish line, that I will stay with you as long as it takes for you to get to that beautiful destination that I truly believe is waiting for all of us going through this. That, there is a healing that will occur that will get us back to a life that is well worth living. I think I've said before, do people fully heal? I'm not sure. But do people always heal to a place where their life is worth living? I've seen that universally. And, that's kind of the message I'm saying too, which is I'm asking you to patiently endure something so awful. But I tell clients all the time, I would never waste your time. I would never ask you to persist and be patient when I didn't believe there was an outcome that was positive, that, I'm not giving you false hope. And I think, again, it's back to that acceptance of, I accept that this is what it is. And I also accept that, unless people, I believe, do other things that interfere, that people have positive outcomes in this as long as they stay patient.
Hmm.
And I
Okay,
think,
sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Confucius says it does not matter how slowly how slowly you go, as long as you do not stop. And that's the key, is that it's, I think I've spoken about it before. It's the Stockdale paradox. It's the idea that I never question if I'm going to get to the end. I am going to do this. I can do this. I have to do this because my life is so unique and special. It's, there's only one Chris Page, there's only one Joseph Wood Doran, and we have to embrace our uniqueness and specialness, that it's worth hanging in there, that we're worth hanging in there. But then the second part of the paradox is, how do I do it day to day? How do I survive those moments? How do I get, through 1:01 p.m. and 1:02 p.m. and 1:03 p.m.? And I think in the other videos we've done, I've spoken about some of those tricks I used. I won't hurt myself today. Counting, as I'm pacing, imagining with the numbers increasing as I'm pacing, that I'm getting closer to a destination, as if I'm climbing a mountain, taking steps up that mountain, using tricks like that to endure the moment to moment, but at the same time, like I said, never losing sight of the fact that there's going to be a positive outcome to this patient suffering.
How hard was that to do, Chris? I mean, when you were in the thick of it, when you were, pacing. Tell me about your own personal challenge, trying to stay patient and trying to stay in that mindset.
I think I think I would argue now it's what's made me so patient now is,
Okay.
um, I think I've said before that there were definitely times where I was only 50.1% hanging in there. I was 49.9% ready to give up. It was that severe. It was that moment to moment. I think a lot of it is just this insane level of faith that somehow, without any evidence, because I was getting worse my second year off the medicine, without any evidence that I would ever get better, just this faith that others have come before me, that thousands of others have healed before me. And it's just that, and also just this amazing belief I think I have inherently in my body. And that even though it was neurotoxically poisoned in a way, that it still had the strength and the natural rejuvenative abilities that, evolution has given me to somehow heal and overcome this. But again, to anybody listening, just know that I have so much empathy because I know the fight. I know how hard it is. And but it's worth it. And that's the thing that we have to remember, that even when our families and friends might be doubting us and disbelieving us and gaslighting us, and the medical profession doesn't understand us, and there's really nobody out there that gets us, still believe that your unique beauty, your unique idiosyncratic, one of you is worth it. And you will get to a place where the journey will pay off. And that's why it's just so important, again, to hang in there, until, I don't like a lot of AA programming per se, but they've got some great cliches. And one of the best cliches is don't give up before the miracle. And, that's what I would argue is don't give up before the miracle of healing happens. And I'm very confident it will for you as it did for me.
Mm. So tell us about the payoff at the end.
Well, that's the ecstasy. And,
Hmm.
you know, I think we can think of words like rapturous delight and insanely great happiness. I mean, for me, it's there's so many layers to it. It's, the gratitude I feel for being able to sit, the gratitude that I can use my voice and the tone of voice. I'm not like at this screechy, high pitched, screaming, yelling, scared voice. The fact that, when we're done with this call, I can lie on my couch and read a book calmly and comfortably. I mean, the very, very basic small things in life I am so grateful for. And then the greater things in life, I think another thing that I've spoken about is one of the things that kept me hanging in there and kind of trying to move forward were future oriented fantasies, that I would someday get to do interviews like this and tell my story. That someday I would be able to create a research institute studying akathisia and really make a difference for the people that aren't suffering yet, maybe, even preventing cases from occurring. The fact that there was a woman somewhere deep in those recesses that I, manifested into existence and things like that. I mean, I think that, again, people often talk about, what's one of the biggest, parts of this is the contrast. I was this bad. I was being tortured alive. I was suffering like no human should ever suffer. And now I'm not. And now, I remember for years I couldn't laugh. For years I couldn't listen to music. For years I couldn't feel the sunshine on my face and feel connected to the earth. For years I couldn't take my shoes off and feel the grass underneath and feel grounded and connected to the earth. And now, again, those simple things of feeling the sunlight on your face, feeling the breeze through the little bit of hair I have, things like that that just bring you back to the present moment. And really, I think in many ways, I've almost regained some of that childhood awe that we all had of just, wow, look at the sky. Wow, I live close to the ocean. Wow, look at how beautiful the ocean is. Feel the water. It's almost like, oh my, like I'm in a constant kind of mindfulness state of really taking, stock of what I'm feeling and how good it feels and what a contrast it is to what I felt. And, I think that is what's so important. I mean, a great quote on ecstasy is just that I'm as happy as I've ever been. I'm in total ecstasy where my life is at this moment. And that's what I try to really give people is the hope that you're here, but you'll get here. And when you get here, it'll be so worth it. Just
And
so.
I wanted to ask you, so how long ago did you recover? When would you say your symptoms?
So I would say that my course was 3 years after the detox of acute raging akathisia, that when it started to, it just started to slow enough that I wasn't pacing. So I probably had a year after the active akathisia left of still intense agitation, restlessness, still terror, didn't want to go outside, still very isolated, but not pacing and as frantic. And then, one of the things I've seen very consistently with people, especially people that have been very agitated for a period of time, is it's almost like you have to pay a bill, which is, I was so elevated with my nervous system for years that I went into like a year and a half of intense fatigue. Like almost like I had to pay off all the time that my body was so, ragingly elevated through intense fatigue, almost like I was resting up all the time I couldn't rest. So that whole process took about 5.5 years. And then slowly then I started to coach people and reintegrate my life. So I would argue from a healed perspective, and I would say I'm 100% healed from akathisia. I still have some lingering symptoms of the original iatrogenic injury. But I would say, for the last 2.5 years, I've been, in the last year and a half, I've been dating somebody that lives 1,400 miles away. I've been flying, going on cruises, driving long distances. Um, I went to a hockey game last week. I mean, it's just went to a concert 2 weeks ago, and this is a big shift too. Is even in the last year or so, one of the things that shifted for me too is my residual like terror of heights has started to reset too. So I actually went to a concert about a week and a half ago and was able to sit in the upper deck, and it didn't cause me any perceptual disturbances. But as opposed to a year ago when I went to the Grand Canyon with my girlfriend and my mom, and I probably got 50 yards away from any of the railings because it was just too overwhelming, the visual, perceptual stuff.
Sure.
But I would argue from a healing perspective, I would say the akathisia is gone. It's been gone for years now. And the iatrogenic injuries, maybe, 80% healed. I still have some lingering symptoms, but nothing that gets in the way of my life in any way.
Great. And that feeling of ecstasy, has that been maintained since you recovered?
Yes.
Has it gone up? Has it stable? Has it gone down? Like, is it just?
It just gets better. It just gets
Yeah.
better because the more I can do, um, you know, like one of the things that kept me alive was this belief that I would be able to give back, that I'd be able to help people, that I'd be able to support people. And every week I get to talk to 30 people going through this. And so that just raises my own energy because I feel so purposeful and so useful, being able to really show people that there's a path, to really be able to show people that there's a purpose to the suffering. I think, I compare what I experienced to a longer version of what a lot of, monks do, which is you go out in the wilderness with no food and water for days. And you kind of induce a state of pain and suffering that leads to enlightenment. And I, would argue that my path in many ways, which ironically, as Admiral Stockdale said after he got out of the prison camp and, was able to reintegrate to his life, he said, while the experience was profound, I would have never traded it. And would I've ever asked for akathisia again? No. But now that I've survived it and gone through this process, I wouldn't trade it because it really created who I am today. And, I would argue that after I've survived akathisia, there's nothing on this planet really that scares me anymore. Because, as I've said, I think in other interviews with you, when you see the devil and you've seen the devil and you look him in the eye, he's not as scary anymore.
Great. Well, Chris, I want to thank you so much for sharing your mnemonic. I think it would be good to just highlight the four of them again, just really quickly in a minute. Let's walk through the four pillars.
So again, we have, hopeful in here is for H. We have to stay hopeful. And then here is so essential because, one of the things I learned on this journey that was so hard is, I was ruminating about the past, about everything that had happened in my life that led me to take psychiatric meds. I was terrified about the future because I'd lost everything. I was disabled. I couldn't even, in certain ways, predict any positives at that moment, even though I was clinging to those future hopes. But you learn to stay in the present. That's why I say in ways, I won't hurt myself today. That was one of my present-based tricks. And then O is optimism and outlook. We have to have, I think Viktor Frankl calls it tragic optimism, meaning that in the light of insane tragedy, in the light of death, in the light of fear and threat, still to somehow maintain some optimism that can carry us through, kind of pulling us towards that future belief that we are going to heal. And then outlook. Again, outlook's not going to change my symptoms. It's not going to change anything really. But at least it's one place where I can choose, in a sense, to believe that this is possible, to believe that I can do this, And again, it's back to an analogy I've used in other interviews, which is a rip current. And a rip current, the way, anybody survives a rip current is to relax and stop fighting. If you fight the rip current, you drown. And I would argue that while, again, it's not going to, have any impact on the intensity of your symptoms, just allowing yourself to accept the process and accept that it is a process, but accept at the same time that the process has a good outcome, I think allows people to have an outlook that gives them an opportunity to get through this. And then P is for persistence and patience,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which kind of go hand in hand. You know, the best way out is always through. It's the only, I think that's another thing that's so frustrating. I wish we could accelerate the process. I wish we could give somebody an expiration date in a sense. But at the end of the day, it's that patience and persistence. It's the idea that I'm going to fight as hard as I can and patiently hope and patiently trust that there's going to be the outcome I desire, which then leads to E, which is endurance. That we have to endure things that I would never ask anybody to endure. The harder the battle, the sweeter the victory. And I think that kind of sums up what the endurance leads to, which is that ecstasy, that payoff, the return to a life worth living, the return to a life that for many of us was so destroyed that in some ways we grieve what was destroyed, but in other way, we can almost welcome the fact that we can rebuild in a new way with a better foundation, with some of the gifts and skills we've acquired from this horrific journey, and really manifest a life that maybe we've always hoped we could. And, that's what I just want people to hold on to is hope, that there is hope, that, that people like Dr. Whit Doring and myself are working every day to find more ways to solve this riddle, finding more ways to support people on this journey, because we both are committed to the same thing, which is helping the people suffering, helping people have hope, and minimizing harm for people and maximizing their gains and outcomes. That's really what we all want.
Nice. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for taking the time to walk us through everything that you know about coaching people through benzo injury. It's invaluable.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and I hope to see everybody soon.
All right.